My name is Marissa Doyle, and I was 36 the day my father's memorial turned into a shareholder meeting. I was carrying a stack of folding chairs across the fellowship hall when my brother-in-law tapped a fork against his glass and told 40 mourners that his wife was about to inherit my father's entire $3.8 million estate, and the rest of us would be walking away with nothing. I set the chairs down. I let him finish every word. But he didn't know about the quiet woman in the back row, with a folder in her handbag. And what happened over the next 7 months would cost my family far more than money. Welcome back to Untold Secret Hub, where the ones who stayed tell you what it actually cost. If you've ever been the person who showed up while everyone else sent a card, this one's for you. Comment when you're ready, and subscribe before we start. The reception was held in the community room of Maple Street Baptist, the same building where my father had run the men's Bible study for 2 decades. Folding tables, a sheet cake going soft under plastic wrap, the smell of drip coffee. Half of Cedar Falls had turned out, because in a town of 8,000 people, when Walter Doyle dies, the town shows up. I was stacking chairs near the coat rack when I heard the ring of silverware against glass. Trent Whitcomb stood at the center of the room, in a navy suit that cost more than my car was worth, and he waited for the chatter to die down the way certain men always do, like the silence was owed to him. On behalf of the family, he began. I want to thank everyone for honoring Walter today. He paused, and I watched him actually smile. And since there's been some confusion floating around, I think it's kinder to clear the air now than let anyone embarrass themselves later. Walter's estate. The house, the acreage, the accounts, roughly $3.8 million, passes entirely to my wife Renee. She was the firstborn, that's what Dad wanted. A fork clattered somewhere behind me. My Aunt Pauline pressed a hand to her chest. Trent scanned the room until his eyes landed on me, standing there in my funeral cardigan with cake frosting on my sleeve. And he delivered the line he must have rehearsed in a hotel bathroom mirror. The rest of you get nothing. I didn't flinch. I've spent enough years in emergency rooms watching people absorb the worst news of their lives to know the body goes still before it decides what to do next. So I stood still and let him finish. Near the coffee urn, an older man in a cardigan cleared his throat. Harold Voss had been my father's attorney for 28 years, and his friend for even longer. He was the kind of man who wore a cardigan to a funeral because Walter's late wife had knitted it for him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Trent, he said, I'm going to stop you right there, as a courtesy. The will you're describing is the old one. Walter signed a new one 3 years ago, in my office, properly witnessed. Nobody announces an estate at a memorial service, son. That isn't how any of this works. Every beneficiary will get formal notice by mail once it's filed with probate. You could hear the ceiling fan ticking. Trent's smile stayed frozen on his face like a sign left glowing in a shuttered storefront. That's not possible, he said. Walter would have told us. Harold picked his coffee back up. He told the people he needed to tell. The new will names an executor. It isn't Renee. He looked at me. It's Marissa. 40 heads turned at once, and I felt every single one of them land on me. My sister Renee was standing by the dessert table, and I watched her look at her husband. Really look at him, the way you'd look at a stranger who just took your seat on a train. Trent buttoned his jacket, which is the thing he does instead of breathing. We'll see about that, he said, like he was ordering off a menu. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the floor tilt a few degrees beneath my flats, because I had known Trent Whitcomb for 14 years, and I understood something nobody else in that room did. He wasn't finished. He was just getting started. To understand what came next, you need to know what my father actually built, because Trent only ever repeated the number, never the story behind it. My dad, Walter, ran a small engine repair shop on Route 9 for 31 years and drove the county snowplow every winter. He died 11 years before this story starts, leaving behind a life insurance policy he'd paid into since 1988 and 40 acres he'd bought for almost nothing back when nobody wanted farmland near the interstate. My stepmother, Carol, leased that land to the Petrosky family next door and never once touched the principal. She'd been a school librarian who reused wrapping paper. Over the years, the land alone climbed past $1.1 million. The cabin my father built by hand on Loon Lake was worth around $45,000. The investment accounts Harold helped Carol manage grew to 1.4 million. Add the house on Larkspur Road and the savings, and it came to that number Trent loved saying out loud. 3.8 million, built by two people who clipped coupons their whole lives. There had been an earlier will. That part was true. Back then, Renee was the settled one. Married, a mortgage, 2 kids, a husband who talked about the market at every holiday dinner like it was weather. I was 24, unmarried, working travel nurse contracts across 4 states, and Carol, being practical, had left the bulk of it to Renee to hold for the family. Trent kept a copy of that old will the way some men keep a Bible verse memorized for arguments. And whenever money came up at holidays, he had a habit of mentioning, generously, casually, the amount we helped your mother with back in the day. He never said the figure. He never said the year. I used to wonder about that, the way you wonder about a locked door in a house you thought you knew completely. Carol was diagnosed with Parkinson's 6 years before she died, on a Tuesday, in a paper gown that embarrassed her more than the diagnosis itself. I'm an ICU nurse. I've spent my whole career walking strangers to the edge of their lives and holding the door open. I know what a long goodbye looks like from the outside. From the inside, it looks like this: a medication schedule taped to the fridge, rewritten in pencil, because the doses kept shifting. Tea brewed at 5:45 in the morning, poured only half full because a tremor spills everything and cools everything faster. Grab bars I installed myself on a Saturday afternoon. Her handwriting shrinking year over year, like a town disappearing beneath the wing of a plane climbing higher. 4 years before she died, I gave up my apartment and moved into my old bedroom on Larkspur Road, the one with the water stain shaped like Lake Michigan. I learned the new arithmetic of her body. She hated pity, so we ran the whole operation on dry humor. When her tremor knocked over a mug, she'd say, "Tell the township we're irrigating." One night near the end, when the house was dark and she thought I was asleep in the recliner, she said to the ceiling, "Quiet isn't the same as gone." I didn't ask what she meant. I filed it away like a key you find on the sidewalk, trusting the lock would introduce itself eventually. Here's the part I need you to sit with. I never told a single person what those 6 years actually cost me. I believed that itemizing love turns it into an invoice, and I refused to hand my stepmother a bill. I thought love kept its own ledger. I was about to learn what happens when it doesn't. While I was learning that new math, my sister was 3 states away in Nashville, living a life that photographed beautifully. Renee married Trent 15 years earlier, back when he sold life insurance out of a strip mall office and called himself in finance. By the time Carol got sick, he'd rebranded as a wealth advisor, leased a house in a gated development, drove a German SUV, and belonged to a country club he referred to as networking. They visited twice a year, Christmas and one weekend in July, and every visit generated enough photos to fill a year of social media. Trent at the cabin, sleeves rolled up, caption roots. Renee and Carol on the porch swing, caption my whole heart, posted from the airport on the way out of town. I'm not saying my sister didn't love our stepmother. I'm saying love has a maintenance schedule, and she'd quietly outsourced hers to me. Trent treated every family dinner like a portfolio review. He'd look around the farmhouse and appraise it. You could actually watch him do it, eyes moving over the crown molding, the barn roofline, the shoreline, filing numbers away. He liked to say, "We built something down in Nashville." The way other people say grace, and always, somewhere between pie and coffee, that same line. After everything we helped your mother with back in the day. One Christmas, drying dishes, I finally asked Carol what exactly they'd helped her with. She wrung the towel once, set it down, and said, "That's not the story he thinks it is." Then Jeopardy came on, and she turned up the volume, which in our family functions as a legal ruling. There was a 27,000 mystery buried somewhere between my stepmother and that man, 11 years deep. I remembered it differently than he told it. One of us was wrong. 9 days after the funeral, the formal notices went out by certified mail, exactly the way Harold said they would. No drama, no theatrics, just the county probate office doing its paperwork. I read mine at the kitchen table on a Thursday. The medication chart still taped to the refrigerator because I hadn't been able to bring myself to take it down. The will was dated 3 years back, signed in Harold's office with 2 witnesses. It named me executor. It left me the house on Larkspur Road, the 40 acres, the cabin, and the accounts. It left Renee our stepmother's jewelry and a 200 Zalozan education trust for her kids, Owen and Grace, ages 15 and 12, along with a letter of explanation held at Harold's office. I sat with that page for a long time. Executor. Some people hear a prize in that word. Nurses hear a shift assignment, because that's what it actually is. A fiduciary duty, a legal obligation to carry out someone's wishes exactly, whether or not your relatives scream about it. My stepmother hadn't left me money. She'd left me a post to hold. That night my phone rang, a Nashville area code, and I braced for the wine glass version of Trent from the church hall. Instead I got something worse. Warmth. Marissa. Hey, listen. Emotions were running hot at the service. I own that. A pause engineered. Family is what matters here. Renee and I think the adults should sit down together before lawyers turn this whole thing into a circus. He suggested Saturday his hotel like it was a favor he was doing me. I said I'd come, and I hung up, and I stood in my stepmother's kitchen with both hands flat on the counter. Loud Trent had never scared me. Gentle Trent did. The Cedar Falls Lodge has a conference room it rents out to traveling salesmen, and Trent had booked it, which told me everything about how he viewed the meeting. Water glasses. A legal pad he never once wrote on. Renee sat beside him in a gray cardigan, twisting her wedding ring, and hugged me at the door a half-second too long. The way you hold something you're about to set down for good. Trent opened like it was a sales pitch. Nobody wants a fight, wills go stale. Carol was sick, we all know she'd have wanted her girls treated equally. So here's what we're proposing. We split it clean, 50-50. A family settlement agreement done within a month. Civil, private, he spread his hands. Or we do this the expensive way. I looked at my sister, not at him. It isn't mine to split Renee. I'm the executor. I have a legal duty to carry out Mom's will exactly as written. This was the last thing she ever asked of anyone. I think you should read it. And the letter she left you. And Renee's eyes lifted at the word letter. And for 1 second I saw my actual sister in there. The one who'd once taught me to parallel park in an empty lot. Then Trent clicked his pen once, like a safety switch coming off. So that's a no. It's a no, I said. He nodded, almost pleasantly, and gathered up the legal pad he'd never touched. 7 days later, a certified envelope arrived from a firm in Nashville. Renee A. Whitcomb, contestant, versus the estate of Carol Doyle. They were contesting the will on grounds of undue influence. And the person they claimed had done the influencing, named on every single page, was me. Before I tell you what was inside that filing, let me ask you something, one woman to another. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who knew the pharmacy's hours by heart, while everyone else knew flight departure times, you already know exactly where this story is headed. Tell me in the comments if you'd have signed Trent's deal, because I need to know I wasn't crazy. And if this is your first time here, subscribe, because what that man did next still keeps me up some nights. Now, the complaint. Priya Sharma, the probate litigator Harold recommended, slid it across her desk and watched me read it, which I later learned lawyers do on purpose. 16 pages, and it described my entire life from the one angle designed to make love look like a crime. The move in became isolation. The pill organizer became control. Driving her to Nashville for her neurologist became managing access. I finished it with steady hands, which surprised me, because a nurse's hands learn steadiness before the rest of her catches up. None of this is what happened, I said. I know, Priya said. It's what can be argued. Different thing, she squared the pages. First rule, and I need you to actually hear it. As of today, you're a witness in your own grief. Everything you did for 6 years is now evidence. Theirs or ours. We decide which. I asked her how a person proves she loved her mother. She said, with records. God help me, I laughed. Here's how a will contest works in Michigan, the short version Priya gave me over coffee that had long gone cold. The estate freezes. Nothing gets distributed while the case is open, not the accounts, not the land, nothing. The estate pays for its own defense, which means every billable hour comes out of the very thing being fought over, like a body funding its own surgery. Undue influence, Priya told me, is the standard weapon against a caregiver, because caregiving looks exactly like influence if a jury squints, and juries squint. Best case, this resolves inside a year, she said. Worst case 18 months, an appeal, and the estate starts liquidating to cover fees. Which assets first? Liquid, then real property. The house would be last. But nothing's last forever. I want to be honest about what that week took from me, because it wasn't money yet. Since the funeral, I'd been grieving on a private schedule, folding Carol's cardigans into boxes, one shelf a night. The contest took that away. My grief got a docket number and deadlines. I started sleeping with a legal pad on the nightstand the way I used to sleep with a pager. One mercy, Harold called to say he was forwarding Priya the entire estate file. Everything Carol had kept with him. There's material in there your mother prepared, he said, careful. 3 years ago she was a very thorough woman. I asked what kind of material. The kind you gather, he said. When you can see weather coming. The next hit didn't come through the lawyers. It came through my job. My charge nurse called me into her office on a Monday and shut the door, and I knew before she said a word, because closed doors are my native language. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the state nursing board. A hospice, adjacent nurse who'd inserted herself into the care of a vulnerable elderly patient, and then inherited that patient's estate, carefully worded, so the word stepmother never once appeared, so that on paper I sounded like a predator in Scrubs. 20 years I've carried that license. It's the only thing I own that I built entirely with my own 2 hands. I'd known Trent would come for the estate. I hadn't imagined he'd aim at the one thing I'd still have left if the estate burned to the ground. Here's what I did, and I want you to remember it, because it matters later. I didn't wait to be summoned. That same week I self-reported to the board voluntarily. I sent them everything. Documentation that Carol's actual hospice care had been managed by an outside agency out of Grand Rapids, with their own nurse of record, their own charting, and that I had never once been listed as her nurse, only as her daughter present in the house. I attached the agency's visit logs and asked for a full review. My union rep told me I was overreacting. Priya said quietly, no, that's exactly right. Paper beats noise. But only if the paper gets there first. The hospital still placed me on administrative review pending the outcome, which meant that inside 1 month, Trent had managed to make both my inheritance and my paycheck provisional. My sister called at 12:40 on a Wednesday night, and I picked up on the second ring, because some part of me had been waiting weeks for it. Trent says the medication logs look bad, she said, no hello, whine in her voice and fear underneath it. He says his lawyers have people who read these things, and the dosage changes look bad. They look bad? I said, because Parkinson's is a disease of constant dosage changes, and any neurologist would tell you that in about 9 seconds. Silence. Then she said the thing she'd actually called to say. The thing I don't think she understood was cruel. You made it look easy. You never once asked for help. Not one time in 6 years you never asked. I sat up in the dark of my old bedroom and looked at the water stain shaped like Lake Michigan. She was right, I never asked. I told myself asking would shame her. That love shouldn't send invoices. And somewhere inside all that nobility, I had handed my sister a gift she never knew she was holding: permission. Permission to believe it was easy. Permission to stay in Nashville, because Marissa's got it, Marissa always has it. My silence had been her alibi, and I'd notarized it myself year after year. I didn't say any of that. What I said was, I'm here now, and I'm asking you to read Mom's letter. And my sister, who once biked 3 miles in a thunderstorm because I'd sprained my ankle at the quarry, said, Trent needs this. Then she heard herself say it. 3 seconds of pure quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a dropped glass. The line went dead. Discovery is the legal term for turning a person's life upside down and shaking it out over a conference table. Their firm subpoenaed 6 years of my bank statements, 6 of Carol's, every pharmacy receipt, every mileage log, my hospital schedules, the hardware store card I'd used for the grab bars. Boxes left the house on Larkspur Road in a paralegal's trunk, and I stood on the porch watching pieces of my stepmother's illness carried off with exhibit stickers on them. There's a specific kind of violence in seeing a shampoo receipt marked Exhibit 41. Lavender, the kind she liked because it didn't sting her eyes. Somebody in a Nashville office building was going to hold that receipt up in front of strangers and ask a question built to make me look like a thief. I coped the way I always cope, by being useful. I organized everything before they could take it. Indexed, chronological. Because if my life was going to become evidence, it would at least be legible evidence. That's how I found it. Going through Carol's kitchen calendars, the spiral ones from the drugstore she kept every single year, I found an entry from 3 years back. October, a Tuesday, in her small shrinking handwriting, Dr. Reyes, 9 a.m., and underneath, gone over twice with the pen. The way you write something that has to hold tell no one yet. I stood at the counter holding a 3-year-old calendar, listening to my own pulse. Dr. Reyes wasn't her neurologist. Wasn't her internist either. I knew her entire roster of doctors. I'd driven her to every one of them. I photographed the page, sent it to Priya, and put the kettle on, because that's what my hands do when my head gets too busy to trust. Priya called back in 4 minutes. Harold's office smelled like paper and pipe smoke, though he'd quit the pipe back in the 90s. He sat me down across the very desk where Carol had signed her will, and slid 2 things toward me. The first was a photocopied report. Dr. Anita Reyes, he said, geriatric specialist out of Grand Rapids. 3 years ago, the same week your mother signed the new will, she sat for a full cognitive capacity evaluation. 2 hours. Memory, reasoning, orientation, executive function. She requested it herself. Nobody suggested it to her. She called and told me to arrange it. I looked at the date. 6 days before her signature on the will. I asked him why she'd put herself through an exam nobody had asked for. Harold folded his hands. I asked her the same thing. And I'm quoting your mother now, because I know my son-in-law. The room went quiet enough to hear the wall clock she'd given him one Christmas. She saw it. All of it. 3 years out. The contest. The accusation. The word incompetent hovering over her own signature. And she walked into a stranger's office with her tremor and her shrinking handwriting and said, "Test me. Write it down. Notarize the weather." Then he slid the second thing across the desk, and my breath actually caught. A plain envelope, sealed. My name on the front in her handwriting, and beneath it, pressed twice with the pen for Marissa. Only if they fight. Open it when you're ready to quit. She left instructions? Harold said. I was to hold it unless there was a contest. I turned it over. The seal was unbroken. I didn't open it. I put it in my bag, and he watched me do it. And then he said gently, "There's one more thing in the will. Marissa, you're not going to like it." The thing I wasn't gonna like was on page 7. 1 paragraph, standard font, quiet as a landmine. A no contest clause. In plain English, any beneficiary who challenges this will forfeits whatever the will gave them. Michigan courts enforce those clauses. Harold had drafted it. Carol had approved it. I understood the logic. It's designed to make challenges too expensive to start. But Renee had already started one, which meant the math ran like this: if they won, everything my mother had decided got erased. If I won, if I successfully defended her will, the clause would trigger, and Renee would forfeit her bequest, not just the jewelry, the 200 zals in education trust, Owen's college, Grace's college, 2 kids who still signed my birthday cards, love. Your favorite niece and nephew would lose their futures as a side effect of me winning. I sat with the will in my lap and felt the entire shape of the fight change. Up to that moment I'd had a clean story I could tell myself. Defending my mother's voice against a man who'd shouted over it. Now her voice came with a price tag attached, and the bill would land on the 2 people in this entire mess who'd done absolutely nothing wrong. He knows about the clause, Priya said when I brought her the page. She tapped the caption of the lawsuit. The contestant listed alone. Only Renee. Trent's name is nowhere on this filing. He filed it in her name alone. If she loses, she forfeits. Her kids lose the trust. His hands stay clean. She looked at me over her glasses. He's betting you'll fold before you let that happen. He built the trap out of your own decency. I'd admire it if I didn't hate it. In May, Trent came to the house. Not alone, and not to talk. I looked up from the flower beds Carol had planted, the ones I couldn't bring myself to let go to weed, and there was a black SUV in the drive and a woman in a blazer photographing the porch on her phone. Trent paced the property line like a man measuring a purchase, pointing at the roofline, saying words like curb appeal and comps loud enough to carry. Just getting a fair valuation. He called over, friendly as a billboard. Then, quieter. Just for me, as the realtor measured the porch steps. You know you're technically living in an asset, right? Squatting? Some lawyers would say. I felt the sentence land and find the soft place. It was aimed straight at the kitchen, where I'd cooked her last Thanksgiving, my old bedroom. The fridge with the medication chart I still hadn't taken down. He'd found a way to walk up my mother's porch steps and turn the house I'd nursed her in into square footage. I didn't argue. Arguing was the show he wanted, ideally with a witness holding a real estate license. I went inside, latched the screen door, called Priya, and by Friday we had a court order confirming the executor's exclusive authority over estate property pending resolution. Legal language for Trent, needing written permission to set foot on that porch again. Small win. Paper over noise. But here's the detail I couldn't file away. After the realtor left, Trent sat in his SUV at the end of the drive for a long time. Not on his phone, not driving off. Just sitting looking at the house. I watched him from the window and couldn't read it. My deposition was in June. A conference room in Nashville with bad coffee, and a court reporter whose keyboard sounded like light rain. Trent's lead attorney, a polished man named Corbin, asked questions the way a scalpel asks questions. Who selected your mother's physicians? She did. I drove. Who managed her medications? Her neurologist prescribed them. I filled the organizer. Who was present when she signed the new will? Harold Voss and 2 witnesses. I was at work. There's a time sheet. He kept the rhythm going for hours, building the story where every act of caregiving was another bar in a cage. I answered short and true, and let the transcript carry the weight. Then, late in the afternoon, when my shoulders had finally dropped an inch, Corbin opened a folder with the care of a man plating dessert. Ms. Doyle, 2 years ago you paid an invoice to Petrosky Roofing for 16,000 out of your own personal savings. Correct. The roof over the north bedrooms failed in an ice storm. My mother was sleeping under it. And 4 months later, you transferred 16,000 from your mother's account into your own. Yes. Reimbursement, at her insistence. I heard how it sounded the second it left my mouth. Was there a written agreement? A note? Anything the decedent signed authorizing that transfer? There wasn't. There was Carol at the kitchen table saying, "Take it back, honey. I'm not a charity case." And there was me wiring it, because arguing with Carol Doyle was a losing sport. Corbin let the silence stretch. Then, almost kindly, "Isn't that what they call financial exploitation of an elder, Ms. Doyle?" And that's where they ended day 1. With a court reporter's soft rain and that phrase hanging in the recycled air. July was the month everyone helpful showed up. Aunt Pauline arrived with a peach cobbler and her verdict, both still warm. Just give them half, honey. Your mother would hate this. Family is family. I told her Mom's will was the one voice in this fight that couldn't get any louder, and somebody had to hold it steady. Pauline patted my hand and left, cobbler and disappointment both, and her Sunday call stopped after that. The nursing board was still reviewing, no timeline given. Legal fees crossed 54,000 and kept climbing. Priya was honest, the way I'd asked her to be. We're positioned to win. But if this drags 18 months, if there's an appeal, the estate starts selling. Land first. Maybe the cabin. You could win the case and lose the house paying for the victory. On the last Tuesday of July, a courier delivered a new offer. 60-40 in my favor. Sign within 10 days, everybody walks. Trent's cover letter used the phrase "last offer before this gets ugly," which was funny in the specific way emergency room humor is funny. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the settlement on one side, the salt shaker on the other, pen uncapped. Here's the truth, and I promised you the truth. I wanted to sign. Not for the math, for the exit. Signing meant Owen and Grace kept their trust. My license stopped being a chew toy. The house stopped being a meter that never quit running. All I had to do was let a man who'd toasted my father's death with a wine glass rewrite my stepmother's final wishes at a 40% discount. In the drawer to my left, under the placemats, sat the sealed envelope. For Marissa. Only if they fight. Open it when you're ready to quit. My hand was on the drawer pull when the phone rang. I asked Priya for one more night. She gave it to me. Quick pause, from me to you. Because this is the part of the story where everybody had an opinion about my life. Everyone kept saying, "Keep the peace." And not one of them asked, who'd been paying for that peace in installments for 6 years. If that arithmetic sounds familiar, if you've been your family's designated shock absorber, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And stay with me, because the envelope in that drawer isn't what I thought it was. The night I didn't sign, I also didn't open the envelope. I stood in the kitchen holding it, and I couldn't, because her handwriting said when you're ready to quit, and opening it felt like a different kind of surrender. One addressed straight to her. So I put it back under the placemats, got in my truck, and drove out to Cedar Falls Memorial Cemetery in the blue hour before sunrise, the hour her tea used to go on. I sat on the wet grass by her headstone with my travel mug and gave her the full report out loud, the way I used to give her gossip from my shifts. The lawsuit, the license, the 60-40, my aunt's cobbler diplomacy. Somewhere in the middle of it I heard myself repeat her own words back to her. Quiet isn't the same as gone. And sitting there in the grass, I finally heard that sentence from the other side. All those years I'd thought it was about her. A sick woman promising she was still in there, it was also about me. A quiet daughter isn't a gone daughter. I'd been quiet so long that everyone, Trent, Renee, Pauline, half the town, had priced my silence at 0. That was their mistake. It had briefly become mine too. I drove home, signed nothing, and told Priya one more day. At 9 the next morning she called anyway. Tell me about the 27,000, she said, because Discovery runs both directions, and I drive it like a delivery route. While Corbin had been subpoenaing my shampoo receipts, Priya had spent months quietly running 12 years of financial records around the estate. Bank statements, plus the meticulous files Carol had kept with Harold. Standard diligence, she called it. You trace every dollar that ever moved through the decedent's accounts. And there it was, 11 years back, the famous 27,000. The money Trent had spent over a decade referencing at holiday tables. The amount we helped your mother with. Except the wire had gone the wrong direction. It had left Carol's account, a school librarian's account, and landed in Trent and Renee's, earmarked in Carol's own pretty, pre-tremor handwriting loan, R&T, brokerage startup. The year Trent left the insurance office to become a wealth advisor, my stepmother had staked him. No repayment, not one entry ever. He'd taken her money, never returned it, and spent over a decade telling the story backward until the whole family, including me, half believed she owed them. Priya laid the pages side by side like a dealer fanning out a hand. It gets better, or worse, depending where you're sitting. 2 business loans in Nashville, delinquent. The SUV lease 2 payments behind. The brokerage bleeding clients. She looked up. The man who announced a $3.8 million inheritance at a funeral was a man drowning in front of 40 people in a very good suit. I thought about Trent sitting in that SUV at the end of the driveway. Engine off, just staring at the house. I'd wanted it to be greed. Greed is simple. This was a man who told the success story so long it had become load-bearing, and the story was collapsing on top of him. I felt one drop of something for him. One? I want that on the record. Then Priya asked the question that mattered. Do we lead with this at trial? Not yet, I said. First I use it my way. Trent's way had always required an audience, a wine glass, a room he could work. So my way was the opposite. I asked Renee to meet me alone, no lawyers, no husbands, at the diner out on Route 9 where our stepmother used to take us after dentist appointments. She came, which told me something. She looked thinner, and she ordered coffee she never touched. I put the bank records on the laminate table between us, turned so she could read them, and kept my voice in the register I use for families in a hospice hallway. 11 years ago, Mom loaned you and Trent $27,000 for the brokerage. Here's her register, the wire confirmation. It was never repaid, and he's spent 11 years telling everyone it went the other way. I watched my sister read. Watched her check the dates twice. Watched her thumb stop on Carol's handwriting. Loan R&T something structural gave way behind her face. He told me your mother offered, she said quietly. He told me a lot of things too. I didn't press. I slid one more page across. Priya's summary of the delinquencies. And then I said the only thing I'd actually come to say. Withdraw the contest, Renee. Do it this week. Before the clause locks in, you keep the trust. Owen and Grace keep college. I will never mention any of this again. Not in court, not at Christmas, not ever. That's the whole deal. It's not a trap, it's the exit. Her hand was shaking when she set the page down. Our mother's tremor, 30 years early. It's not that simple. Rissa. Everything's filed through him. Every answer goes through him. She stopped, hearing the shape of her own marriage said out loud for the first time. She left without saying yes. 2 days later, I learned Trent knew we'd met, because that's when the last civil thing between us finally died. He posted it on a Sunday morning, timed for right after church, which I have to believe was deliberate. A long, sorrowful essay on his public page titled The Truth About My Mother, in Law's Final Years. It never used my name. His lawyers surely appreciated that. And it didn't need to, because everyone in Cedar Falls can count daughters, isolated from the family who loved her. Medications controlled by one person. Oh well, that appeared in the final years, benefiting the caretaker. Asking questions is not an attack. And under all of it, the worst part, photographs. My stepmother in her last months, sunken small in the recliner, pictures I'd assumed were just for the family group chat, deployed now as exhibits in a public smear. The town split like kindling. Casseroles stopped arriving. 2 women from church went quiet on me in the grocery aisle. A waitress at the Route 9 diner put a hand on my shoulder and said nothing at all, which somehow meant everything. 72 hours, said the letter that followed, to accept 60/40, or the next stop was a criminal referral over the 16 Zozen, and the phrase they'd chosen was elder financial abuse. Priya asked if I wanted to respond publicly. There were facts enough to bury him. I sat with that temptation. I did. I'm human. I typed a paragraph in my notes app and it felt like drinking seawater. Then I deleted it because a public brawl was his arena, his wine glass, his room, and I had spent 6 years learning a different kind of strength at a different kind of bedside. Wednesday, 7 a.m., I was in Priya's office before her paralegal had even made coffee. She looked up, read my face, and reached for a legal pad. No deal, I said. File it. We're going to trial. She wrote something short and underlined it twice. Things moved fast after that, the way a river does past a certain rock. Our formal rejection went in. Trial date set for October. The same week, 2 pieces of paper landed that changed the entire climate. The first came from the nursing board, complaint reviewed, allegations unsubstantiated, no action taken, file closed. 1 page. It had cost me 4 months of bad sleep, and it was the first domino that fell my way because of records I'd sent before anyone had demanded them. Paper beats noise. But only if the paper gets there first. The hospital lifted my review, and my charge nurse apologized in the break room over coffee she'd paid for herself. The second piece of paper was already in my kitchen drawer. The night before trial, I finally took the envelope out from under the placemats and sat in Carol's chair at the table, and I understood the instruction at last. Open it when you're ready to quit. It had never been a consolation prize for surrender. She'd known me. She'd known exactly which night I'd be sitting in her chair. The night before I had to stand in public and be looked at. Which she knew I'd rather die than do. She'd known that would be the night I wanted to quit. I broke the seal. 1 page. The shrinking handwriting, gone over twice where it mattered. She'd seen everything. The tea at 5:45, the nights I sat in the hallway outside her door listening to her breathe. All of it, catalogued in a ledger nobody could ever subpoena. And near the bottom, the sentence she'd pressed over twice with the pen, let them look at you, Marissa. Being seen isn't a betrayal of the care. It's the last part of it. I read it maybe 30 times. I slept 4 hours more than I had in months. At 60:10 the phone lit up. Renee, can we talk before court? I got to the county courthouse 40 minutes early, and she was already on the steps. My sister, alone, in a coat too warm for October, holding her purse with both hands like a railing. I walked up and stood beside her, and for 1 second we were just 2 women outside a building where our mother's name sat on a court docket. Rissa, she started, and her voice had none of Trent's polish in it. It was the quarry voice, the thunderstorm, bike voice. I read the letter. Harold gave me my copy months ago, and last night, I finally read it. I need to tell you something before we go in there. Then the glass doors caught the morning light, and Trent came up the steps with Corbin and an associate, 3 suits moving like a weather front, and I watched my sister's spine do something I'll remember for the rest of my life. She stepped back, 1 small step to the side, out of the space between me and her husband, and folded in behind him, eyes down. Whatever sentence she'd carried up those steps died right there on the granite. Trent paused beside me, adjusted his cuff, and leaned in close enough that only I could hear it. His voice was pleasant, funeral reception pleasant. Enjoy today. You'll still walk out of here with nothing. 6 years ago, that sentence would have found the soft place. But I'd spent the night with a different sentence, in better handwriting. I looked at him level, the way you look at a monitor and not a storm, then you have nothing to worry about. We went inside single file. Family in name, litigants in fact. The courtroom was older than everyone in it. Oak the color of strong tea, a ceiling fan that ticked on every third rotation. Aunt Pauline in the gallery, Mr. Petrosky in his good flannel. Half the church distributed across both sides of the aisle, like a wedding nobody wanted to attend. Corbin opened with the story his letter had promised. A vulnerable widow, a daughter who moved in and closed the doors one by one. Doctors chosen, pills counted, calls screened, and then, conveniently, a brand new will. He was good, he never raised his voice. He just built the cage bar by bar and invited the jury to notice me sitting inside it. After lunch, Priya called Dr. Anita Reyes, and the pressure in the room changed. She testified in the calm, unhurried voice of a woman who'd explained hard things to families for 30 years. Yes, she'd evaluated Carol Doyle 3 years earlier at Carol's own request. A full geriatric cognitive assessment, 2 hours, orientation perfect, memory above her age norm, executive function intact, reasoning intact and notably firm. When Priya asked why an ailing widow would seek out an evaluation nobody had suggested, Dr. Reyes said Carol had been direct about her reasons, and the court had her intake form, her own words, taken down verbatim by the nurse. Because I know my son-in-law. Someone in the gallery exhaled audibly. The fan ticked. Corbin objected to the reading and was overruled, and I watched 2 jurors write something down at the exact same moment. Trent stared straight ahead, jaw working, a man listening to his mother-in-law testify from inside a filing cabinet. Day 2 was the money. Corbin came for the 16,000 with the confidence of a man holding his best card, projecting the wire transfer, my mother's account into mine, letting the phrase financial exploitation cool on the jury rail. Priya took it apart with carpentry, not fireworks. First the invoice from Petrosky Roofing, dated 4 days after the ice storm, emergency tarp, then full replacement. Then Mr. Petrosky himself, filling the witness box like a hay bale in a phone booth, confirming he'd been paid from my personal account, because the estimate came due mid-transition on Carol's bill pay, and that Carol had stood on that very porch and told him her daughter would reimburse herself the minute the paperwork cleared. Call her if he heard otherwise. Carol ran a tight ship, he said, and 2 jurors smiled, because half that county had been run by Carol Doyle at some point, in a classroom or a church kitchen. Last, Priya entered my nursing board file, the one I'd opened voluntarily, before any demand, alongside the hospice agency's logs proving I was never Carol's nurse of record. Is that, Priya asked the room generally, the behavior of someone hiding money, or of someone who documents everything because she spent 20 years being audited on sicker days than this one? By the afternoon recess, the exploitation card looked less like a card and more like a receipt with a story stapled to it. That's when Corbin's associate touched Priya's elbow in the hallway. One final offer, he said, tonight. We took the meeting in a borrowed conference room at 6 paper cups, nobody sitting. The offer was simple and it was smart, and I want you to understand exactly how smart. They'd withdraw the contest entirely, tonight, signed before the courthouse opened. In exchange, the estate would convey the Loon Lake cabin, the place my father built with his own 2 hands, appraised around 540,000. Everything else stayed per the will. And because the contest would be withdrawn rather than defeated, the no contest clause would never trigger. Owen and Grace keep their 200,000. My license stays boring. The town gets no verdict to gossip over. I never have to take the stand, never have to sit in a box in front of half of Cedar Falls and itemize 6 years of my mother's decline out loud. All of it over by 9 a.m. for the price of 1 cabin and fine print nobody would read. Leaving Trent Whitcomb to walk away with his story fully intact, having turned a funeral announcement into 540,000 of lake real estate through 7 months of siege. Priya gave it to me straight, because I pay her for straight. We're winning. Reyes landed. Petrosky landed. The board file landed. But juries are weather, Marissa. I've lost sunny days before. If we win instead, the clause fires and the kid's trust is gone, permanently, on the record. Your victory did that. She set her pen down. Legally, taking this deal is completely defensible. Nobody who's read this file would blame you. I stood at the window with my coffee going cold, feeling both futures sitting in the room with us, and one of them was quieter. And God, I have always chosen quieter. That night I read her letter again at the kitchen table. In the morning I called Priya before her alarm went off. I'll testify. We declined the offer on the record, in open court, so it couldn't hang over the jury room like fog. And then Priya said the words I'd spent 6 years arranging my whole life to never hear. The defense calls Marissa Doyle. The box was smaller than it looks from the gallery. I put my hand on the Bible my stepmother had taught Sunday school beside, looked out at a room containing every version of my hometown, and did the one thing she'd asked of me in handwriting pressed twice. I let them look at me. Priya asked me to describe an ordinary day, and I didn't perform it. I reported it the way I'd give a shift, change handoff. Kettle on at 5:45, because her medication worked best on an empty stomach, timed ahead of breakfast. Tea poured half full so the tremor wouldn't spill it, served warm, not hot, at the exact temperature where she could still hold the cup and feel that it was tea and not a chore. Buttons, in that last year, took longer than you'd think, and we never once rushed them, because the buttons were where she told me about her old students. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fan tick. When Priya asked why nobody, not family, not friends, had known the true scope of it, there it was, the question underneath my entire life. I answered it under oath. Because I believed love that keeps receipts stops being love. So I kept none. I was wrong about that. The receipts were never the problem. I told the rest of it too, because the truth is load-bearing or it's nothing. That Renee came twice a year. That the phone rang less every winter. I set it down flat, no salt in it, and heard something small break in the second row where my sister sat, and I kept going, because the letter said the last part of the care was letting it be seen. All of it. Corbin rose for cross, and from the defense table Trent made a sound, half laugh, half objection to nothing, loud enough that the judge warned him, and 60 people watched the Polish crack. Corbin asked one question too many. You expect this jury to believe you tracked nothing, wanted nothing, counted nothing. I looked straight at Trent when I answered. You counted everything, Trent. Every dollar, every point, every square foot. You counted everything except the years. The jury was out 4 hours, long enough for the vending machine down the hall, and me to become close. Then the foreman, a retired mail carrier, stood and delivered it in the flat, undramatic grammar that undramatic people use for the most dramatic things imaginable. The will of Carol Doyle valid. The contest dismissed on every count. No shouting. Courtrooms don't sound like television. They sound like chairs and breathing, and one gavel used gently. I sat still while it landed, and what arrived first wasn't triumph. It was her. The sense of her, upright at that kitchen table, pen pressed too hard, finishing the last item on a list she'd started 3 years before she died. Then the bill arrived, because verdicts itemized too. With the contest defeated, the no contest clause did the only thing a clause can do. Renee's bequest forfeited automatically. The jewelry, and the 200,000 trust for a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, gone in the same breath that had saved their grandmother's voice. I watched Corbin explain it to Renee in a whisper, watched her nod the way people nod absorbing a diagnosis. Trent walked out into October light and found the whole gallery already gathered on the steps. The church rose, the diner regulars, every phone that had shared his Sunday essay. All of them watching a man who'd once announced $3.8 million at a funeral leave holding nothing but a settlement he'd refused and a story that had finally stopped working. He didn't look drowned. He looked evicted. Renee passed me at the bottom of the steps, close enough to touch, and didn't look at me at all. I'd won everything I'd asked the court for. I drove home to Larkspur Road, parked in the drive, and sat in the truck for a full hour before my hands would turn the key. The weeks after moved the way paperwork moves, slowly, then all at once. Probate closed, fees were paid, $162,000 all told between both sides, most of it out of the estate. The tax a family pays for refusing to talk while everyone was still alive to listen. The house stayed the house. The Petrovskys renewed their lease on the 40 acres with a handshake on the porch Trent had once measured for square footage. As for Trent, his ending was quieter than his beginning. The brokerage wound down by Thanksgiving. The SUV went back on a flatbed. The creditors he'd been outrunning for years finally caught up in a single season. He was never charged with anything. Life rarely invoices that neatly. I heard he landed a sales job somewhere outside Knoxville. His page stayed up. 2 weeks after the verdict, he posted a sunrise photo and the caption "Excited for this new chapter." I read it standing in my kitchen and felt no urge to comment, which is how I knew something in me had finally healed over. The man had told a whole town my family would get nothing. I let him finish, months ago, and life finished the sentence for him. News about my sister came sideways. Through Aunt Pauline, who resumed her Sunday calls as if the whole summer had never happened. Renee had filed for divorce in Davidson County. She was renting a 2-bedroom near the kids' schools. She hadn't called me, and I hadn't called her, and both of us knew exactly why. In January I drove to Nashville and did the thing I decided in the truck that hour in the driveway. Not with estate money. The estate does exactly what the will says, nothing more, and I'd sworn an oath on that and meant it. With mine. I opened an education account for Owen and one for Grace, funded from my own inheritance once it distributed, $110,000 each, the exact size of what the clause had taken, administered by a trust officer downtown. No conditions. No letter attached. No thread for anyone to pull. The kids would simply have college the way their grandmother intended, without owing a single conversation about it to anyone, least of all me. I didn't do it to fix things with Renee. Some bridges you rebuild, and some you just make sure the kids can cross without paying the toll the adults ran up. The trust officer asked if I wanted to be named or anonymous. I thought about it longer than she expected, then gave her my name. I'm done being the anonymous kind of good. A week later my phone buzzed once. A Nashville number, 2 lines, no greeting. They'll know it came from you. That was all. It was enough. It's a Thursday in early spring now, first Thursday of the month, and my stepmother's kitchen won't hold one more chair. 9 people, most of them strangers a year ago. A retired postmaster's wife sorting her mother-in-law's pills into a Monday through Sunday case while she talks. A dairy farmer who hasn't slept a full night since his father's diagnosis. We call it the caregiver circle. No sign-up sheet. Coffee's always on. The only rule is that here, the ones who stayed get to say what it actually cost, out loud, to people who already know without being told. On the refrigerator, where a medication chart hung for 6 years, there's a calendar of first Thursdays now, each date pressed twice with the pen. An old habit from a steady woman with an unsteady hand. The kettle's on by the second story. The kitchen light stays on late. Quiet lives here. Gun doesn't. If you take one thing from my story, take this. The people who love the loudest aren't always the ones who stayed. And the ones who stayed don't stop counting the years, just because nobody else ever did. That's my story. 6 years of quiet, 1 envelope, a clause nobody wanted to win. If this reminded you of someone, the one who stayed, check on them today. They won't ask you to. And talk to your parents about their wishes while they can still say them out loud. It's the kindest paperwork in the world. If you know someone who needs this story, send it to them, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.